All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second day of Trailhead. How's everybody's Trailhead conference so far? Excellent. A request is we got a packed house. If somebody is having trouble sitting on the floor, please approach one of the open seats. And we're all part of Ohana, so I'm sure you can accommodate if somebody needs to sit on the chairs. So we're going to get started. We got a lot to cover, and I want to make sure we have lots of time for Q&A, because I think that's going to be pretty important. So myself, I'm Vin Adala. I'm a product manager on the Lightning platform team. And one of the areas that I own is platform actions. And today we're going to be talking Lightning alternatives to JavaScript buttons. And with me, I have
Priyanka Bharadwaj. I'm a software developer in Actions team as well.
So she's the one behind the scenes doing all the hard work to get us some of these features. And I'm the guy just saying, hey, come on, can we get more, right? So let's jump right into it. And there's my Twitter. It's my personal Twitter. I put all kinds of random things on there. Forward-looking statement. You've seen this before. There's definitely going to be a lot of stuff that we're going to talk about, especially towards the end, some never-before-seen things on this topic. They are for the future, so whatever purchasing decisions you're going to make, please make it based on the available feature set. So jumping right in, what are we going to cover? What are actions? What are JavaScript buttons? Why do people use them? Why don't we support them? What are the things that we're doing, both declaratively and programmatically? And what are we doing in terms of tools to help you get there? So we definitely understand that JavaScript buttons are of huge importance to you guys. So when we look at metrics, we've seen that in about, when we look at some of the active orgs, we see over 2 million JavaScript buttons. So it's heavily used, and I definitely sort of feel all your guys' pain in what it takes to convert all those buttons. Obviously, you all don't have 2 million. But I'd like to sort of see a show of hands for those that want to participate. You don't have to answer this question. How many people have over 25 JavaScript buttons in their orgs? Okay. How many people have over 50? Okay. Yeah. How many people have over 100? Yeah, there we go. I'm not going to ask anymore. So this is exactly what I wanted to understand is, even for some of the simple stuff, it takes a while. So when we run metrics, on the 2 million JavaScript buttons, we see that a lot of them fall into very similar categories. About a third of them fall into the category of URLs that are used to predefine values. You create or edit records. You pass in the field ID and a value, and everything comes pre-populated. That tends to be a very common use case. It's oftentimes a single 1 or 2 line JavaScript, window.location.href or top equals. You're manipulating the URLs. They tend to be pretty simple. The other set of them tend to be around opening URLs. You're reading a field, and you're opening a URL to Google Maps, or you're opening a URL to Google. Again, these tend to be pretty simple. These tend to be about another 20%. And there's another 20, 30% which are really complicated. You're calling external scripts. You have if-else statements. You've got switch cases. You've got all kinds of things happening. And those are going to be a little bit more complicated to convert. So we're going to go through a gamut of that stuff and what we have for each category. So why did we decide that we don't want to support JavaScript buttons in Lightning? Even though they're so popular, even though we have a very good sense of why you're using these buttons. First and foremost is that, of course, a lot of you in this audience are going to say, hey, I'm a JavaScript jockey. I know exactly how to write good JavaScript code that is not, that conforms to all the security standards. But we find that there's actually a lot of JavaScript out there that has been cut and paste from forums or that has come from some other author than the admin or the developer that is managing it. And we sometimes see security issues with that JavaScript code. Some of the things that we see happen with this JavaScript code is what we call cross-component access, where you've got components on the different parts of your page, and they are reading information from other components without going through our APIs, without going through our security checks. So for example, in JavaScript, you can take an HTML page and you can look at the DOM and manipulate values on the DOM without ever hitting our APIs. Not good. Not good for HIPAA compliance. Let's say you've got a component that needs to be HIPAA compliant. It's bound by certain security restrictions, and these JavaScript code are just accessing information right off of the page. Not a good thing. And over time, what we've also noticed is that a lot of JavaScript code, we don't know we can't parse that JavaScript code in all its full extent. So when we introduce new features, we often break implementations. It's very hard on the product side to keep track of what people are doing with these to make sure that whatever we introduce doesn't break. So it becomes a security issue and also a product manageability issue. So Lightning, you may or may not sympathize with that, but that is why we did it. So in Lightning, what we did is, from the ground up, security is built in. Security is at the top of our mind. So we've got something called Locker Service. I think a lot of you probably heard about it. And what Locker Service does is it ensures that there are no such things as cross-component access. There are no such thing as trying to use backdoors to get at APIs, bypassing our security restrictions. So everything you build in Lightning, everything that I'm going to show you today is subject to the security standards of Lightning and Locker Service. Also, the other great thing with Lightning is that oftentimes with certain JavaScript buttons, there's actually third-party components out there that could solve that problem for you. So on App Exchange, you may be able to find something. And also, what we're looking at is, like I said earlier, we know what people are doing with JavaScript buttons, and we are looking at declarative alternatives. Sure, everybody loves to code, but wouldn't it be faster if you can get there with clicks and not code? I mean, you've probably heard that a number of times. So we're looking at that and saying, hey, what are people doing with JavaScript buttons? And oftentimes, it could be a gap in feature set. Can we bring that to Lightning and even Classic if possible? And those are some things that we're going to go through. So, a little bit of time we spent on that, but it's important. So fundamentally, what you're going to be doing with your JavaScript buttons is you're going to be migrating through different types of actions. That's basically the rule. That's basically at the meta level what this whole entire talk is about. Is you've got these JavaScript buttons. We're going to migrate them to the appropriate type of action based on what your JavaScript button does. And I'm sure you're all familiar with JavaScript buttons, but with actions. But there's a number of different places where you can place actions. And when you're trying to convert your JavaScript buttons, you want to think about where all actions show up. So one is over here, which is called an object-specific action. This is very much aware of record ID. It's aware of the record context. So if you're doing things like editing records, if you're creating child records, these all require record ID. And so you want to be using object-specific actions. Next, we have global actions. These are the actions that show up in Lightning when you hit the plus menu. And these are not record context aware. They're not record ID aware, which is why you don't see here edit event. You only see new event. You only see a bunch of new things. That's because they're fundamentally designed to be separate. This often tends to be a question I get a lot, which is, why can't I put an edit inside global? That's because global actions have been defined to not be record context aware, while the object-specific actions are. And on top of this, we have custom-made actions or tailor-made, things that you can build yourself. So we've got some things that are out of the box, such as log a call and edit records and new records, so on and so forth. But there's a few which require coding. And they do that to allow you flexibility. So the first one is Lightning Component Actions. We're going to spend a lot of time on that today. Lightning Component Actions are really powerful. If you know how to write Lightning components, it's actually pretty simple to turn it into an action and have it show up on your layout. Next is Visual Force Actions, technology that's been around for some time. You can use Visual Force, turn it into an action as well. So from your more advanced JavaScript use cases, you would want to consider these two. And lastly, we have Canvas Actions. Not very popular, but still a very cool technology. And what it allows you to do is if you have a third-party application, you can pretty much integrate it right into Salesforce. So we're going to cover the first two today. So as I said, in that, 1/3 of the use cases with JavaScript tends to be URLs with predefined values. So what we have here is a quick action setup. So we've actually introduced this. I don't know how many of you are aware that quick actions have a predefined values feature in it. So when you create a quick action, you can go in and say, here's the field, and here's the predefined value that I want using a formula. So what you wrote with JavaScript before, trying to find the field ID equals this and that and constructing this long URL, you can actually do that declaratively through quick actions. So here, for example, the amount field is a calculated value from account.parent last year revenue C. So this is something that you want to consider if you're using predefined values. Again, it tends to be a very, very common use case. Next one is there's a lot of URLs here. I think you guys should have access to slides after the talk. But the idea here is that, again, the other very common use case with JavaScript buttons is opening URLs within or outside of Salesforce. Well, the good news is you don't have to write JavaScript code to do this. You can actually do this using, on the left side, you see the button links and actions. You can create a new URL button or new URL link and pass in, for example, at the bottom there, might be hard to see, just a straight HTTP URL that's going to FedEx here and reading your data from the field. So it supports variables. It supports reading fields. And you can see some of the other examples there. I can open google.com, which you'll see in a little bit. And then I can open relative URLs to account ID. I can open a URL to open the record in edit mode, and a number of other things. It even supports URL4. So this tends to be, again, another very common use case. You don't need code for this. You don't need JavaScript for this. Now, we get into more complex use cases. So the first two cover quite a number of use cases out there. So for the more complex use cases, what do we see? So we see that JavaScript buttons are often written for client-side validation, meaning you want to pop up a form, and as you're typing, you want to validate the user's data. You don't want to have to hit the send or the save button and get a whole list of validation errors. So client-side validation is a common use case. Feedback and confirmation messages. We see this quite a bit when we check the JavaScript code. You see lots of alerts, lots of alerts of different types. Confirmation messages. Are you sure you want to do this? Yes or no. And you probably want to be doing an inventory in your head about what sort of JavaScript buttons you have, and hopefully some of them resonate with you. And alerts of, hey, are you sure you want to do this? Yes and no. Or sometimes it'll just be an alert saying, here's some information with an OK button. Sometimes you'll see alerts with options. Pick option 1, option 2, or I open up an alert and say, you want to open URL A or open URL B? Right? They're very, very common use cases with JavaScript buttons. And so to convert those, we don't have anything declarative. We don't have anything like the quick actions that I showed you earlier. And what you want to be doing with those use cases is investing in our Visualforce and Lightning component actions to convert those. So sort of a quick difference between the two. Visualforce actions, they work both in Classic and Lightning. This often tends to be a deciding factor between which of the two you're going to choose. So if you're in an org, which still has some Classic users, and you're in a mixed environment, definitely want to be considering Visualforce actions. But if you are in an environment where you've pretty much migrated over to Lightning or plan to completely migrate over to Lightning, you don't need to support any Classic users, you definitely want to invest in Lightning component actions. It's, if you've seen some of the talks yesterday, there's quite an investment happening in the Lightning component framework and Lightning data service and a number of things around that. So that tends to be one of the main differentiators on what you would choose. The next big differentiator is that custom Visualforce button. They work on lists and related lists. So when we look at where JavaScript buttons are often used, they're often used on lists and related lists to do what we call mass actions, right? So you're acting on a set of records, using a single JavaScript button. So right now, Lightning component actions don't work on lists and related lists, and it is a common feature request that I get. Definitely important on the roadmap. Meanwhile, though, the visual force buttons can get that for you. So if you're doing something with JavaScript buttons where you are updating a field on 10 different records in a list or a related list, that's completely possible with Visual Force, and that's going to work in Lightning, and it's going to work in Classic as well. Another very common question I get usually when I do this talk is, what do I do with my buttons on my lists and related lists? You would want to use Visual Force Actions. And the other thing I want to say about the Lightning component actions is Lightning only. And again, if you are familiar with writing Lightning components, you're going to be pretty much right at home with Lightning component actions. So we're actually going to talk a little bit about this. And I know there's probably users of different knowledge levels here about this. So I'm going to give a quick overview, and we're going to jump into a demo on some of these things with Priyanka there. So I would say that there's about 8 files that make up our Lightning Components package, but you really kind of only have to worry about a couple of them when you're building actions. And if you want to do something more advanced, obviously, you can look into that. But what I'm going to cover today should be enough if you've never touched Lightning Components to understand the demo that we're about to do. So the first, most important file, I think, is the component file. So this has, HTML markup with Aura attributes in it. This defines your structure. And if you were able to attend Greg Ruiz's talk and Manoj Mahesh's talk yesterday, I would definitely say check that out, because what they're actually doing is building a number of standard Lightning components where you actually can just reduce the amount of HTML that you use and build it completely based on the standard components that we give with Lightning. But if you wanted to integrate that with HTML, you definitely can. So if you want a component and you want to show a label, you want to put some buttons on there, you're going to define all that in a component file. And then the controller file, second most important file, is sort of what happens when you invoke your button. What is the logic that runs for your component file? So if I've got a button, I click the button, what should the button do? That's written in the controller file. And number 3 is optional. If you want to style your component, you can use CSS, or even better, just use SLDS. You don't have to. I used to write CSS myself, and I never really had that much fun messing around with hex values and keep refreshing all the time. Well, the good news is with SLDS, we've got tags on our developer site. You've got things that you can cut and paste and play around with different styles, and it's really awesome. And the great thing is that when you're building these components, they're going to look like they belong in Lightning, right? They're not going to look like a random JavaScript alert dialog that every browser renders differently. The Chrome has a different alert, as does Firefox, as does IE. It looks kind of weird. So with SLDS, you're going to get all that. In fact, you even get things like toast messages, right? You don't have to go invest in a third-party JavaScript UI framework to show toast messages. We've got that for you. It's going to look like it belongs in Lightning. Lastly, you have the Apex controller. So this is the server-side controller to handle requests such as saving data, retrieving data. And this is evolving. Eventually, you're going to be less and less dependent on these Apex controllers. And in fact, in the last couple of releases, we've seen that with the advent of Lightning Data Service. So I put it here in case there are use cases where you want to still use it, but you definitely want to be considering Lightning Data Service. And Kamyar and his team, they did a talk yesterday about some of the advancements that they're doing in Lightning Data Service. So definitely look at that. So I could see in a short term, really all you really have to worry about is the component file, the controller file, and potentially the CSS file. So it's actually becoming much more simple to build Lightning components thanks to everything we're doing there. So the good news for you guys is you might want to write this URL down. It's on GitHub Developer Force Lightning Components Bundle. I probably should have shortened it, but I wanted to make you guys work just a little bit. So this is something that we released about a month ago or so. And what it is an open source repository, and it contains 9 components that represent the most common use cases, most common advanced use cases with JavaScript buttons. So things that you cannot build using our declarative APIs. So this includes, we'll get right into it, actually. Let's show you. Did everybody Anybody need this? You got it. Okay. Go back. You mean this one or back one? Okay. Take a picture or something while people are writing it down. I should pass out cards. That would have been good. So what we have is, you're good? All right, excellent, excellent. I want to make sure everybody hits this and visits this. What you're going to get is a whole bunch of stuff that I just talked about. On the first component is client-side validation. We wrote that for you. Toast messages. We wrote that for you. Dialogues that have multiple options. We wrote it for you. And there's 5 more. So what you want to do is you want to go through. Actually, you know what? We're going to jump right into it. Priyanka, you mind opening up the, there's the GitHub repo. So when you get in there, you can see that we've got a whole bunch of sample components, and we list everything. So you can either clone this, as a number of our users have, or you can even hit click here to install, which will install it as an unmanaged package in your org, which means you're going to be able to use that and build off of it. And going further down, you can see each of the components we list with all the files that make it up and what exactly it's meant to do. So for example, if we go to pro bono opportunity, which we're going to spend a little bit of time on, what this component does is when you open this component, a pop-up window is going to ask if you want to convert this opportunity to pro bono, meaning the amount is going to turn to 0. And it tells you those are the 4 or 5 files that make up this component. There's a CSS file, the JS file, the component file. I just talked about it 2 slides ago. It should pretty much sort of make sense what this does. And like this, we've got 9 components. Like, for example, number 9 is account probability. It shows you 3 buttons with high, medium, and low. So Priyanka, if you can go up and drill in a little bit on one of the components at the top. So what we can do here is we've got the, we install this in an org. So for example, open up quick contact with LDS. So this is using Lightning Data Service. So you're going to get examples that use Lightning Data Service and examples that don't use Lightning Data Service, depending on what we're doing. And this is a component that does client-side validation. So first name is a required field, and we just skipped over it. And guess what? We didn't have to submit. Same with last name. Phone number, let's type in letters. We know that doesn't make any sense. It's probably hard to read, but it basically says, hey, you need to put in numbers. So let's go ahead and cancel that out. So that's how that component works. So if you're doing something in JavaScript with this, there's no need to reinvent the wheel over and over and over again, which is why we created this. We want you guys to start off somewhere. The next one is show on map. Again, a very common use case. I showed you in that big list of tables where we're opening Google Maps and things like that. So here we've got two options here. So let's select billing address. And it's going to open up Google Maps, and it should see where it goes to. Yep, there it is, North Carolina. So go ahead and close that out. And then we can invoke the next one, which is the shipping address. And where does that go? Does it go to North Carolina? Nope, it's in San Francisco, Moscone. So how did that happen? So let's jump in. And what it's actually doing is right there, the billing address and the shipping address. It's reading those values. And it's presented them as an option to customer using alerts. Let's jump to a couple other ones, like opportunities. Put a couple of things on there. The first one, let's check update probability. So here the probability is 20%. Again, you look at that. That's the SLDS styling. We use the SLDS button styling for high, medium, and low, and that's how we got that. We didn't have to write any special CSS. So if you change it to high, you get a toast message. Everything was successfully updated. Your value updated to 80%. And the last one we'll look at is convert to pro bono. Right now, the amount is $300,000. So let's jump to pro bono right there. And it's a confirmation message, something that you often see with JavaScript buttons. Hey, are you sure you want to do this? Obviously, if we hit cancel, it's going to just close the window. But if we hit confirm, let's see what happens. And you get a toast message, and the amount is 0. So how did that happen? Can we jump into the developer console, Priyanka? Show them. Let's refresh that. So this is when you download or check out when you clone from GitHub, this is the code you're going to see. So all the way at the top, you're going to see, again, this is open source, so feel free to modify. What you're going to see is exactly what this component is for. And on line number 17, you're going to see Lightning Quick Action without header. So if you're familiar with Lightning components, really, there's a number of iterations to that interface, but that's really all you have to implement is the Lightning Quick Action header. And we've got comments all over the place. And you can see on line 29, it says that you're about to convert this opportunity to pro bono. Are you sure you want to continue? That's that dialogue that you saw. And then line 34 and line 35 are the buttons. These are the to cancel and convert button. And so we've got the convert to pro bono function that we're going to open up in the controller. So when we hit that button, it would have opened the JavaScript controller, and it's going to run this code here. Again, this is all going to get even simpler with some of the things that we're doing in the future. And here on line 18, we're going to call that Apex controller. But going further down, when we get a callback from that, if it's a success, you're going to show that toast message, eForce show toast, again, using standard components that we got. And those are the title and the messages. And else, if there's any errors, then we just log it to the console. So let's look at that Apex controller. And you can see here, all, again, commented. And what it's doing here, it's taking the opportunity amount on line 27 and converting it to 0 and hitting the update on line 32. So that's pretty much how that component works. We have heavily commented it because we know that there's users of different skill levels with Lightning components. And we're hoping that this is something that's going to basically help you get started. But I have something even cooler. So this is for the first time that we're actually showing this outside of Salesforce. So wouldn't it be great for some of the components, so for some of the use cases around quick actions, where you have URLs, where you're showing quick actions with predefined values, if we can convert those automatically for you, if we can parse the JavaScript for you and convert them to a quick action. So for those of you who have maybe 100 or 50 or 60 of these, sure, it's trivial to look at the URL and try to match the field ID to a quick action, but it's going to take some time. But wouldn't it be great if we could do this automatically? Well, that's what we're going to do. So the first one that we did is converted as the Google button. And the Google button is very common. You sort of saw it earlier. What it does is it's going to open up a google.com address, and it's going to look inside a field or look for a value and search that. And you saw that. As quick as that, we took that URL and converted it to a URL link. And I'll show you exactly, if it all works, how it works. And then the next one that we're going to convert is called the red account button. And what this red account button does is it's one of those URLs where we set a predefined value. Right? You've got the field ID and you've got a value. If you were to do this manually, you have to open it up in Classic. You have to look at the URL and then figure out, okay, this URL maps to this field. Go, in a separate window, have the quick action definition, and then, it takes time. But this does it automatically. So Priyanka, can we show how these things work? Let's go to our org there. Hit refresh. Hopefully it's picked up our new 2 buttons. Do we have Google? Yes, we do. All right, so let's hit Google. What do we get? There it is. It's opened up google.com. That was a JavaScript button that we turned to a URL link. So let's check the second one. That is a red account, and what it does is it sets a predefined value red account. Used to be a JavaScript URL. And now it's a quick action with predefined values. What do you guys think about that? So initially, the use cases that it covers are sort of the simple yet common use cases. Those use cases where you've got a single line of JavaScript or a multi-line JavaScript that is creating these URLs. Eventually, we plan to do things. I know people do concatenations and variables with JavaScript buttons. Wouldn't we try to get into that? So what we want to do with this, if we can switch over to the slides for a second. We're trying to make this available in late spring 18. So keep an eye out for it. It's around the corner. Right now, I'm doing sort of private beta testing with this, and eventually we may open it up a little bit more. What you want to do is, if you're not already part of the Lightning Now success community, join that. When anything happens around this or anything happens around JavaScript buttons, I'm there. All this information will be posted there. In fact, when we did the GitHub repo, we announced it in the Lightning Now success community. So the idea is that eventually, we're going to hopefully target about 20% of the use cases out there in this initial launch in spring 18. Of course, it depends on whether whether your org has the use cases that we're supporting, the two that I showed you. And one of the other ones that we didn't show you that it's going to do is, if you do have alerts, it's going to try to parse alerts and turn them into Lightning components as well. So that's a feature that exists. But it won't do complicated alerts. It just does the confirmation alerts, like, are you sure, yes or no? So keep an eye out for it. We're pretty excited about it. We're going to try to get user feedback and see where we want to evolve this to next. And what I want to say here is that we definitely do understand the pain. I take it as a challenge to see what I can do for you guys. So in summary, what do we see today? So we saw that I definitely know what you guys are doing with JavaScript buttons. I understand that. We understood that. We saw that there are a gamut of things from simple to complicated. And for the simple ones, you can either use the converter tool, the Lightning configuration converter that's going to come out. That's going to be your first step when it comes out. And obviously, you should test before you deploy. Then the next step is going to be, if the tool hasn't picked up what you need, you have your quick actions and URL links and buttons that you can create yourself. And if you've got something even more complicated, we've got our GitHub repo. You want to start with that to see if something's out there that already solves or gets you partially. And if that's still not solving your problem, then obviously you have to write your own Lightning components or Visualforce actions. So we're trying our best at different levels and different steps to give you something to jump off of. Again, I will remind that join the Lightning Now success community to make sure you stay up to date. And we also do have a trailhead called Lightning Alternatives to JavaScript Buttons that you can take, and you can actually write a Lightning component action there, and with the goodness of Trailhead, it'll actually check your code for you. And roadmap-wise, in summer 18, we are going to be bringing predefined values via formula to pick lists. This does come back as a feedback saying, hey, I'm glad you have quick actions with predefined values, but I've got pick lists and they don't support formulas. Well, they do now. So I think that's going to be good. And then approximately spring 18, we just talked about that, is a Lightning configuration converter. And then in the future, we got a bunch of things around actions and JavaScript buttons that we're looking into. So action overrides improvements, conditional visibility of actions, depending on the form factor. If you're on mobile, you get to see a set of actions. If you're on one.app, you get to see a different set of actions, or actions based on a certain stage in the path. Right? These are all conditional actions. Very much important to see what we can do. Lightning component mass actions. This is having Lightning component actions on lists and related lists, and Lightning component action attributes. As you all know, Lightning components have attributes, and we want to support those in Lightning component actions as well. Right now, we only have just straight support for actions without the attributes. So, got a lot of plans for you guys, a lot of work to do. So with that, I want to thank you, and if you have questions, please come to the mics, and that would be the best way. All right, thank you guys. Thank you. Let's leave it.
So one of the first things I'm thinking of using Lightning for is to start migrating the Service Console to Lightning.
Yes.
So and I've had to create buttons. Right now, I can't remember whether they're Visual Force or not, that open, subtabs and things in the service console. Do components support that type, of action or?
Yeah, so that is not an action that we have built declaratively to open subtabs. You do have to use the JavaScript API to do that. The JavaScript API can be used in Lightning components, right, in the controller file. So you can do it that way. So I think you seem to be doing it correctly.
Well, I haven't started yet.
Okay, then that is, your approach is correct. That's what you would want to do. Go ahead.
We've been converting the URL JavaScript redirect buttons to URL buttons, like you said.
Yes.
But the main challenge that we ran into was within managed packages, the URL buttons didn't have access to the namespace, to know what the namespace was. And I think a lot of other people have run into that too. So is there something we can do about that to make the URL buttons aware of the namespace? Yeah,
so I've heard this feedback before, so it's something that we're looking into. I don't have a solution right now, but keep an eye out for it, yeah.
What we had to do was we put the namespace in the hierarchy custom setting to use it that way.
That seems to be the workaround for it, yeah. There's no other workaround, yeah. Do we have, yeah. I'm going to switch back and forth. Go ahead.
Do you guys have a plan to make the width of the pop-up for quick actions customizable as well?
Yep. Yes, that is in the plans. It is right now at a lower priority than the ones that I've put up there. But we do get a whole bunch of requests around the display configurability, the width. Hey, I don't want it to always be a modal. Can I decide whether it's going to be a modal or an docked composer or takes up the entire full screen? So we get requests around display configurability, but we're trying to close these gaps first, but it's definitely on my list.
Sorry, I don't know. You can hear me, right?
I can hear you.
Okay, so.
Or I can, here, let's, there you go.
When you were talking about the buttons on the related list that is going to come, right now, our only option is to create a custom Lightning component to make a related list with the checkboxes right now, with the button, right?
Or Visual Force, right? Depending on your use case. You can put Visual Force buttons on lists and related lists.
But the problem is that we don't have the checkboxes.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So for what I'm doing right now is the only workaround.
That is correct.
We're actually creating a specific related list showing the checkboxes next to it to perform the actions, right?
That's correct. So one of the things we do have, you definitely want to look into this, is on lists we just added mass quick actions on lists, right? Okay. So look that feature up. It just was released, and we're extending it in the summer release to have support for more objects. So definitely look up mass quick actions on lists.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Is there ever going to be a plan to be able to use, like if you configured a Lightning quick action in a Lightning component that you're coding up to like drop it into the markup? So for example, if I'm making some kind of interface and I want to have a button that makes like a child record, can you like drop in like a create new contact button that leverages the quick action functionality in your markup?
Yeah, let's talk afterwards. Yeah.
I have a slightly related question. That is, I'm trying to override a new button on a related list to call a custom Lightning component to create a new child record, but it doesn't have access to the record ID of the parent.
Yes. So this is something that we brought up to the components team. I don't have an answer for you yet, but stay tuned. Stay tuned. Not that I know of. It's not fully in my area, so yeah. Any other questions? I'll follow up with you right after. All right, cool. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.